Hello, Daniel. Welcome back to the show for the third time. You're a rare elite group of guests. Not many have been back three times.
I feel like I deserve a smoking jacket or something with my name embroidered on it.
Maybe you
Third
make
time
it to
guest.
like the fifth time. We'll have one especially made for you.
It's the fifth. Okay.
What I do love is that all three times are on a completely different topic, which you've gone like incredibly deep on. And I find that hysterical.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, we got chatting over something kind of really random the other day. And then when you told me you were up to, I'm like, that sounds like something I'd really enjoy talking about. So yeah, here we are again on a completely different topic.
Yeah. Well, and then the next topic we were surmising was going to be garden snails or something even weirder.
Polarity in garden snails. Probably shouldn't laugh. It could well be that. That's so right. We are talking about something that is your latest passion, which you were naming something like kind of impacting the world from ecstasy or making a contribution from ecstasy. And I was like, I love that. Yes. So I kind of want to ask two things. One, I'd love, I guess, a definition of what you mean by that. But I know also just before we started recording, you was actually kind of came into this from somewhere I wasn't expecting, from you having COVID. So I don't know if you want to kind of weave those two things together, but that's what I'd like to know more about.
Okay, so we'll start with what the heck I mean when I say contribution from ecstasy. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of framing our connection to the world and wanting to give to the world, but not from a place of a problem or that anything is wrong or that stuff needs fixed or that everything's so screwed up. It really approaches you giving to the world, knowing yourself as a gift and knowing that everything exists out there is a gift. And I found that for most people, it's something, the world is full of things that are wrong that need to be made right. And in approaching the world as if things are wrong, you actually recreate the problem in your own consciousness. You reinstantiate it, you underscore it. I wrote down some notes last night, and I don't know if these are going to make any sense, but you know, for every marriage that tries to solve loneliness, a lonely divorce hangs in the wings. And for every attempt to hide the truth, a potential whistleblower is born. For every skyscraper, there's a controlled demolition decades away. So every problem that we try to fix, the polar opposite is imbued in that problem. And so I thought, well, what's the way around this? And it's not solving a problem. It's just casting your joy into a perfect world. And if people are offended when I say a perfect world, I mean, there's some slices that we could take on that, because clearly my head's not that far up my ass. I know the world is not perfect. But to approach the world as if it could exist no other way, therefore it is perfect, is to give the space to work with it. It's to give that space for a contribution from ecstasy. Now, you said that I go really deep, and I have no idea if that made any sense. So how did that land?
Well, you're just so talking my language there. So I may not be the best person to judge as to whether it made any sense, because it made perfect sense to me. And it really brought to life again when you told me what you're up to. I was just like a hell yes immediately, because that really is so much of a kind of underlying principle, philosophy that we do our work from. So I see it so similarly to you. There was something about the way that from my perspective, it's just so much, such a beautiful way to live, like such a fulfilling way to live. You're creating that impact and feeling great whilst doing so. But I really loved the way you said, and there's actually a kind of really logical and practical reason to do it, which is, as you're saying, you create the polarity of the very thing you don't want if you're doing it from here's a problem that needs to be fixed. And the way you the note taking you did last night, I think it was really worthwhile, because I think you brought that to life so well. So yeah, from my perspective, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and there's another secondary effect that's not often seen, and I know that you're familiar with this concept of the drama triangle. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And
It's so
so,
funny. It came to like, yeah, it's really weird. As you were talking, I'm like, yeah, it so is. Like, we talk about it as kind of victim consciousness versus sovereignty, and through the lens of the drama triangle, renamed the victim triangle through the work of Lynn Forrest, which we use a lot in our work. And I was thinking, like, yes, I'll let you talk more, but like, I was literally thinking of that as you were talking.
yeah, for sure.
Mm.
So when we kind of approach the world as if there's a problem, we approach the world from inside this thing called the drama triangle, or what you're saying is the victim triangle. Now, the victim triangle, for those who aren't aware, has three kind of stops on it. One is a perpetrator, one role is a victim, and one role is a rescuer. And when you go to solve a problem from this level of it's a problem, and we need to find the cause of the problem, and then we need to fix that, all that happens is that the perpetrator, the victim, and the rescuer, they move stations. So if I'm trying to think of a good example for this, but anytime you try, it reminds me of an Einstein quote where he says, you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that it was created. And this is why, because people just end up moving their station on this drama triangle, and we kind of keep recreating it. Almost like we just take off our hat, I take off my perpetrator hat and I put on my victim hat. And then the rescuer takes off their victim hat and they put on their perpetrator hat. And so we just kind of change stations. And so this isn't something I necessarily want to get into on the podcast, but it's definitely worth looking into. So the idea that we can contribute from ecstasy keeps us off the drama triangle, and it actually puts this stuff to bed, so that we can kind of go creating. We can kind of create from nothing, create from joy, create from ecstasy.
I just realized I was so into what you were saying, I'd forgotten to highlight parts as we were talking, which is a good sign, but it causes a problem for the team on the back end. Like, didn't you highlight anything for quotes? No, the show was too good. Well, I love what you just said about the victim or drama triangle. And I think there's the reason that this isn't often seen is that it can feel as though change has been created in that moving hat. It's like, I've created change because look, something's happened, movement's happened, I've created change, and not recognizing, for the exact reason you've said, you're doing that from within the same consciousness. So it's change, but it's not transformation, it's not expansion, but it's so easy to think it has happened because there's been change. Yeah,
it's really easy to look at. And so there's one statement of faith that I have here. And so there's there's another quote by somebody, I don't know if it's Brian Greene or it's a physicist, who's, give me one miracle and I'll explain the entire universe to you. So this also requires one miracle. And I think for smarter people, they'll probably be able to explain it, but I'm not quite there yet. The one miracle that I'm asking for is, or the statement of faith that I'm going from here, is that whatever project we take on is imbued with the energy that we start it with. It's imbued with the intention that we start it with. And so that's why it's so important for me to contribute from ecstasy, because if you contribute from something's wrong, then you create more of something's wrong. When you contribute from ecstasy, then you create more ecstasy. And I wrote this a little while ago. I really have mixed feelings about quoting myself, but but I'm going to. It's true that it may be utterly indefensible for a body of people to anchor in joy while many suffer. Yet there's no other platform from which to make a joyful impact.
Yeah. I think it was worth quoting yourself on that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm really loving how you've laid this out. Can we bring it back to the COVID experience and how this was created?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 40 and a half. We're rewinding into March, early March. I'm 40 and a half. I just broke up with my marketing client. I am single. I am making ends meet barely. My kids are coming in, but not into the room. My ex-wife has brought me groceries. I don't have community. Every meter on which I would measure my value and measure my worth was just rapidly declining. And I looked at that, and the way that I perceived myself, my self-concept would always be like, okay, well, I'm a little overweight, but I'm making more money, or like, I'm not making very much money, but I have a great community of people around me. And so that it always in my mind had to plus or minus equal about a 7. Like my set point for my ego was about a 7. Like I'm a solid 7 human. And here I'm laying in bed. I'm like, 6. I'm better than 6s and 5s and 4s and 3s. So like I was like, good job, 7. You're a solid 7. It's all bullshit. But here I was laying in bed, looking at all of these meters, looking at my relationship, my community, my parenting, my money, my vision, and none of them are adding up to 7. And it's at that point when I saw, like, I have to stop identifying with this body and these circumstances in this life, because I'm not winning. I'm not, it's like 7 was winning or 7 was passable. And so I stopped. I just stopped identifying with these things because I was losing. And I'm like, well, what do you do when you lose? You throw yourself at the mercy of God. And in all of my post-Christian mystical spiritualness, I would be up at night coughing and in pain and inviting Jesus into the space. Wow. Not from a dogmatic place and not from a place that I really knew anything about, but I was like, come give it to me. Like whatever this experience has for me, bring it. And then over the next month and a half or so, as I got better, I experienced the awakening of being ordinary and identifying with everybody that I saw on the street, my 6s and my 5s and my 3s. I was in love with everybody that I would walk by. And that was a self-perpetuating situation that just, it changed me. And I thought, well, how can I create a community? How can I just, bring all of these people in to this experience of beauty? And that's what got me kicked off on creating one thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is Unfold Fest, which holds this ethos of contribution from ecstasy. So that's the Cliff's Notes version of where this all came from.
Wow. As the origin stories go, there's a pretty good one. Yeah. Wow. So we were also talking just before we started recording how I think as we were talking how like a couple of weeks ago, and I think if I understand rightly, at that point you would say that you were in this state that you could call ecstasy, and right now you wouldn't say that's the case. And you were saying, and then there's truth to it. That's just reality, that we're kind of in and out of states. And so apologies if I've paraphrased or incorrectly put words in your mouth, but I'd love to hear a bit about that, because I think it can sound like this is a fixed thing. You reach that point where you're doing everything from joy, you stay in joy, and there's nothing else. And I don't believe that is what you're saying.
Yeah. So we understand that there are stages that people reach, like kind of places of maturity from which it's hard to fall back from. But then there are also states that are more transient. And this was a state that I was in for a number of months, but as life went on, as circumstances changed, as I got further from that experience, the shine wore off. And so as I'm describing it today, like I'm describing a bit of a memory of it. And I'm it's not like I feel this state of ecstasy in my body that I'm giving back from. And so, I try to solve that as best I can, which is like, when you're in this state, how can I use the momentum from the state to create structures for myself that will keep this alive as long as possible and potentially even grow it, to counteract the inevitability of the mundane life kind of coming and wearing off the shine.
Yeah. Actually, I think it's worth saying, because listeners that haven't listened to our previous shows or just may not remember, you already had, I'd say, a pretty deep understanding of a lot of the things that you were then able to build structures from. And I know it just in my own life and work that it can be very common for people to have experiences of the kind you've said. And it may be that it was triggered by, I don't know, going to a spiritual retreat and they had this kind of big opening, big insight, but then don't have that understanding of creating, like I guess, a place to put it so it has meaning, and then also an understanding of how to build a structure around it. And then it goes, and then there are the mercy as to kind of like, might come back, might not. But so I just wanted to say that, because listeners may not know that that's where you already had some of that to be able to build that out from.
Yeah. Like what you're reminding me of is something that I say about peak experiences, and they get a bad rap because people don't know where they fit.
Yes.
Peak experiences are an amazing thing in life. You just got to know that they're a peak experience, and that there are things that you do after the peak experience, not only to integrate the lessons that you've learned, but to kind of keep a structure alive, or to build a structure. You use it. And I think they get a bad rap because people don't understand that. They have this peak experience and it feels big and it feels like their life has changed forever. And then they tell all their friends, and their friends are like, yeah, man, you were saying that 6 months ago, but where are you now? You're back to the same place.
Yeah. And I think it probably is kind of the same thing. I don't know. I'm not saying like what you described is exactly like a peak experience, but I think it has got certainly overlap. It's certainly a kind of similar kind of thing. And expecting again that to just do all the work forever evermore probably is unrealistic. Right. So where should we go now? Do you think it'd be useful to then talk about how do we go about creating contribution from ecstasy? Where do you think would be a useful place to take it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really practical place to go. I mean, the thing is, I don't know. I
love your honesty as well.
No, it's more of a, like, the piece that I have right now is to share that it's possible. The piece right now is to share that there's a way to create in the world that is not fixing problems, and actually to kind of reflect that has more of a damaging side effect than people may realize. Now, how to go about it, we can talk about that because it really is, it gets even more offensive if people are paying attention.
That's what we really like.
Well, I don't think a lot of people are going to see it initially. You really have to pay attention to the between the lines of it for it to the offense to really take root. And
that's good.
This is like a hallmark of my life, is like I heard what he said. It didn't seem offensive, but if I think about it, this guy's really He's really out there. This is what I'd like to bring in. I'd like to bring in the concept of self-care as the popular understanding of self-care being inadequate. And the way that myself and a lot of people have viewed self-care as a concept is, let me get back to zero or back to neutral. Like, let me not be in a deficit anymore of caring for myself. And so what contribution from ecstasy requires is a level of self-care that not only brings you back to zero, but fills you up to a point where you can maintain a state of joy and potentially states of ecstasy through that care for self. And so it invites a changing of the definition of self-care from going from deficit to neutral, actually up into the upper limits of holding an immense amount of joy in your body, in your life experience.
Oh, it's so interesting you should say that, because right at the very start of our conversation, I can't remember if it was when we were recording, maybe when you were describing what you mean by it, I actually had the vision of an overflowing cup, because I think that's how I relate to it. It's like a contribution from overflow, like that's required to be able to create from that place. And it can look selfish, it can look like it's, like greedy, and yet it's from that place that what you're describing, it becomes possible. And so I think the way you've just named it is brilliant and so necessary.
Yeah. And listen, if you if you're finding yourself with a fear that you're going to be judged by people who say the world's so messed up and you're off taking care of yourself, you're off doing XYZ, spending money on yourself and your own care, you're spending time for yourself and your own care, and you're fine. Why are you, your life is better than everybody else's. Why you keep spending all these resources on yourself? It is indefensible. Like there's no answer to that, because it's not coming from the same level of values.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually back on the victim triangle, actually.
Right. And so you'll find that people want to pull you back to it. They say, like, you come on, you're not coughing up blood, get back out there and fight in the streets. And you're saying, like, no, that's not the quality of life that I'm calibrating to. Like, not coughing up blood is not good enough of a state for me to live my life from. I actually think that it's possible to live my life from a state of joy day in and day out. And I'm going to put structures in place to make sure that I'm not just at zero, not just not in a deficit, but I'm actually shining. And again, this is what you said. I'm going to care for myself first, and then I'm going to care for my relationships and my family. Then I'm going to care for my community. And then if there's anything beyond that, then the world gets it. Right. But it has to start from the consciousness of joy and ecstasy, because whatever you do is going to have that, pardon the woo, energy signature.
Yeah. Oh, I'm all good with that kind of word.
Okay.
It's really just hit me how what we're talking about here is so where we're coming from. And it's so kind of embedded in all the work we do. And then it's just really hitting me. I'm pretty sure I've never had a conversation as specifically about this as this conversation. It's actually like blown my mind that I haven't. And so everything you're saying is just like, yep, that's exactly how I see it. Of course, that makes sense. But it's like so clear to me all of a sudden. It's just like, of course, yes, this isn't how most people view this. And for all the reasons we've already said. And it's just like hit me like, my goodness, like this is such an important conversation to be had. But yeah, it's kind of blowing my mind that I've never had it before. Certainly not like a whole conversation specifically about this. So I'm like, kind of like, this is amazing. Of course, we need to be talking about this. And exactly as you're saying, sorry, my dog's rolling around making behind me. Um, for the reasons you've just said, I think that it can be challenging. Certainly, I think in the early days when we're moving from that, the way that we think we have to create, we have to contribute, which is from a deficit, is from solving problems. I know that I had a period where, as I was kind of moving into this other way of creating and being in the world, I remember one conversation with my sister where she actually said something like, she used the word selfish. I can't remember what exactly it was. I don't know if it was, I think it was to do with my husband taking our children out every Saturday so I could have, like I usually have a bath and, like just spend a morning doing my own thing to myself. And I think that was what the conversation was. And she didn't say it horribly, like it was like we're very close. She can say that kind of thing in a way that it isn't like she is actually saying I'm selfish, but basically that was the message. And I think it was one of the clearest moments I've had, which is, yeah, that's so interesting that it looks like that to her. And yet I'm out in the world creating a ton of positive impact because I'm selfish enough to do this. And I think that was like one of those moments where I saw that so clearly. And I think maybe at a different point in my life, that would have had an impact of like, oh my goodness, maybe it is selfish, and worried about that judgment, worried that I was wrong to do that. And it didn't. It just made it really clear to me, like, oh, okay, it's required that people are going to think I'm selfish. It's okay. That's the territory as it is. And it's okay. I'm going to choose that anyway.
Yeah. It's indefensible. You are selfish. People will look at you and point their fingers and label you and judge you. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
You can succumb to it.
Well, as soon as you start to engage or doing something with it, you are then back in that same level of consciousness again. So it requires you not to, which is perfect too. But yeah, I think that's part of the work in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah. To not, you have to be kind of anchored in this, which is like, no, I am the authority on the level of life that I want to have. And it's not just not living in deficit, it's actually more than that. And so if you can take a stand for your own life where you're like, no, I am going to live every day with joy, and I'm the authority on what it takes to do that, and I'm committed to doing that, and then we're at a good place to start.
Yeah. Do you think it'd be helpful, and it may be that you're like, well, this is early days, so I don't really have any kind of really meaningful examples, but what I'm wondering is if listeners are hearing this and thinking, okay, I'm getting this so far, he hasn't thoroughly offended me or haven't figured out that he's offended me quite yet, and are kind of like, okay, I'm getting that. Do you think it might be that we can give some examples of this actually, I remember before we started recording, you're saying something that's often can be really impractical. Your intention is to make it practical. And I laughed. Yeah. I love the way you set yourself challenges, Daniel. So what I'm wondering is like, is there a way we can make this practical and tangible in terms of from this place, this is what's possible, and give examples of that, either our own examples or other examples you've seen out there in the world?
So I have to set this up a bit because we haven't talked about this. The whole outgrowth of this is about this festival that I created called Unfold Fest, which is a community of people who are committed to contribution from ecstasy. So this whole ethos is an umbrella for a community that I'm pulling together. And you, of course, are like an icon of somebody who would fit well in the community. So people identify with you or me or this, like this is kind of our jam. And we met in Costa Rica about 6 weeks ago. And we started talking, there's a bunch of people from Austin, Texas there. And Austin has experienced a big influx of interest from the coasts, especially California. California has had some uh, management issues, I guess some governmental issues, and a lot of people are like, screw this, I'm headed to Texas. And as a result, there's the homeless problem in Austin, Texas has gotten quite pronounced. And so we wanted to look at this problem from the lens of contribution from ecstasy. And so you could say this is a problem and we have to fix the problem, and we got to get people to give and get people to show up at the shelters. And then somebody was like, what if we just had a dance party at the, dance party dinners at these places? Like, why can't you bring joy as you serve soup? Like there's nothing that says you have to show up at a soup kitchen and be dour and have it be quiet. Like everybody responds to joy. So why don't you bring that in and create a combination dance party and meal for people who aren't like you, and what's that going to do? Is it going to fix the housing problem? No, but it's going to raise it's going to raise the energy. It's going to raise people's experiences of themselves. It's going to get people connected in ways they never were before. There are not direct solutions that necessarily come out of that, but what we're creating is a contribution from ecstasy. And so we're going to go create ecstasy.
Oh, I love that example. So is that something that you have already started, or is that an example of something you may do?
Yeah, we're working on that.
I love that. I got chills when you said that I can really feel exactly that. It's not necessarily, and I also, what I really heard in this, part of my work kind of passion is around magic, and what I just see over and over again is the more we try and like plan out exactly how something's going to happen, the less space we've left open for magic. And I really heard that in what you're saying. It's like, yeah, who knows? Like it may not exactly like tick these boxes or create this, and this, but the overall intention of creating a different energetic one of joy will create something. And there's a kind of space of mystery that can be created within and from, which I also love. And it feels to me that's, I'm interested to get your thoughts on this. It feels to me that is part of creating from ecstasy, is that we kind of let go of that grasp on needing things to be exactly a certain way, having it all planned out, and it's going to kind of go through these stages and that it's going to get to this end result. It feels to me, and this may just be my own experience, but it's required that I be willing to let go of control and really just kind of submit to whatever the thing is and allow it to flow as it's going to be from that place.
Yeah, I mean, you have to take on that if everything is perfect now, because it could be no other way, then anything that comes out of your contribution and your ecstasy and your joy is perfect as well, even if it's not the way that you thought it was going to be.
Yes, that's very well summarized. Yeah, for sure. I was also thinking of an example from our work where one of the aspects of the work we do is helping people to discover their gifts. And there are often people who have struggled a lot with neurodivergences, being kind of very sensitive people who have struggled a lot because of that. And the work we do isn't to kind of solve that problem and kind of, okay, let's help you cope in a world where you're neurodivergent, you don't really fit, or you've kind of got all these sensitivities. Often it will come up in kind of immune disorders and stuff, mystery illnesses and things. We're very much coming from a place of, and you named this earlier, like, you are a gift. There's nothing wrong here. It's just about allowing you to be that gift. And that's completely where we're like, that isn't a kind of like a nice phrase. That's 100% how Jonathan and I see it and see people and see things like neurodivergences. And yes, as we kind of go through that work, healing happens, integration happens. but ultimately this isn't about that, kind of isn't the focus. It isn't about solving those problems. It is about allowing someone to be the gift they came here to be. And that feels to me, I never again seen it quite like I have in the way that we're talking about, but that feels to me a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, when we start talking about everything is perfect, that's offensive, right? Because it's not. And people use this word with spiritual bypassing. People use that word.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this in. Yeah.
And and that's
Now you can
fine.
really
Again,
get offensive, don't
sure. Well, I mean, that's one of those things.
you?
It's one of those words that people use to judge other people for not being in as much pain as they are. So there's a paradox of acceptance and contribution. Like, why would you do anything if everything is perfect? And what we're doing is we're holding two understandings of the nature of reality simultaneously. We're holding it could be no other way, therefore it is perfect. So this is this higher existential plane. And then we're holding the way that we're like, okay, but we would actually like less suffering in the world. Like, there's some impulse to grow, there's some impulse to create, to relieve, to support. And it's holding the paradox of the perfection of everything. And yet we are here to notice and to change and to dance with these energies. And so this whole thing is just an invitation to do it from the emotional state that you want to see the result happen in. So if you want to create more problems, create from a space of problems. If you want to create more frustration, create from the space of frustration. If you want to create from ecstasy, create, you know, that's likely going to be one of the outcomes that's imbued in your work.
Oh, you've named that so beautifully. And yeah, it is a paradox. Hence, it isn't one of those ones where there's going to be, you know, if you look at it just from one lens, it could absolutely look like bypassing. But the way you've spoken about it, I think, is really, really helpful to recognize, yeah, this isn't something that is easily like put in a box and understood, and we can label it as this. You know, by very nature, it is a paradox. The as you were saying there about, you know, the very fact you're saying, I want things to be different, could be seen as you're seeing it as a problem. And I was thinking, well, you know, as far as I see it, we are here as humans to create change, to you know, expand, to bring about other things into creation. And it feels to me that doesn't have to be you know, regardless of what the change is, that doesn't have to be about fixing problems, even if it could look like that's what's happening. That's what I heard in what you said. It's just like, of course, you know, there's going to be things that we are here to, and maybe I'm getting a bit kind of into my own view on the world, but like, as far as I'm concerned, we came here choosing what we were here for. As a soul level, we came here to have an alignment for certain things, certain, bringing in certain ways of being, certain changes. And from that place, I don't think we necessarily have to see it's like I came here to fix a certain problem, just we came here to create a certain kind of change.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I get two pictures with this. One is that we wake up and we see a rock, and the rock needs to be moved somewhere else. And so we go and we push the rock somewhere else because we know where the rock needs to go. And the other way that I'm kind of suggesting we explore is that there's a rocket, and no intention that it rhymes with rock. And you just go and you just launch this rocket of desire. And you don't know where the hell it's going to go. You don't know where the wind's going to take it. And you don't know where it's going to land, but you know that you set that rocket off with a pure heart. And there's something that you really brought into focus about releasing outcomes and magic that makes that light up for me. That, you know, I'm going to go in the world and I'm going to set off my rocket of joy. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it just seems like such a different energy than, I see this rock and it needs to be over there. And so we're going to work and we're going to put this rock where it needs to go.
Yeah, I love that. I just thought that our very first conversation, however many years ago that was about, I may not have this completely right, but correct me if I've got this wrong. It was about you having had a successful business, sold it, and then having given the vast majority of that money away. Is that bit right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. From where you are now, I know, I'm not saying as in like, do you have regrets or kind of you can't go back and do it differently? I just wondered, through the lens of where you're now seeing it, what your thoughts are in terms of where that was being created from.
Oh, the giving away. There was something in my gut about it feeling so good and so and scary and right, and it was. And years later, like whenever like sometimes I'll get back in touch with that feeling where like, what would it be like just to give everything away and start over again? And I mean, it brings up an interesting like divergent path here, which is I just don't, you can have money and give it away, and I think pretty much like you'll get it back like in short order. Like what,
Yeah.
like it's
It won't
not
stay
about
gone.
yeah, that it's not about like the number in the account, it's about the energy that you kind of live and move through life with. And so you can actually give away a bunch of money, and but people don't people don't understand that. They don't move through life like that, so that's pretty offensive too.
But what I heard in what you've said is actually, it seems as though I wasn't expecting you to say what you said. Actually, I was thinking you might have said, oh, actually, I can see now looking back that I gave that money away from a place of trying to solve a problem. But it actually sounds like you gave that money away probably from a place of joy.
From a place of selfishness. Yeah. Selfish joy, selfish growth.
Yeah.
No, I don't even recall. Like, I mean, I can think of the places that I gave it to, but it wasn't anything that was connected to me trying to fix the world. I was just like, I got to get rid of this money because I want to see what it feels like to get rid of this money. Because I have this impulse that this is a growth edge. I want to grow. I want to feel how this feels in my body. I want to experience this. It was totally selfish.
I find it fascinating that that was how many years ago it was, and then you've ended up with the passion you've got now. And I was kind of joking at the beginning, like you've got all these like just completely disparate passions, and I'm like, maybe this is the golden thread that's weaving through your life.
Yeah, what is it? What's the golden thread? I'm gonna write it down because I sure as hell can't see it.
I'm going to charge you for this. This right here that you're talking about, I can really see that I mean, this message in itself, I think, is pretty radical. There's, talking about contribution from joy. And it feels really interesting to me that before you even had this distilled as a concept, it very much seems like it had its roots in you giving that money away. And so as much as that, the conversation we had back then was a completely different topic, it actually feels like it's like of the same family.
Yeah, I can see that now. It didn't even occur to me that that was connected. Thank you. I'll Venmo you.
Right. Well, I've absolutely loved this conversation, but we are now coming up to the end of the show. And this has been just such a delight. Again, I'm just like mind blown that I've never had this conversation with anyone before. So if people would like to find out more about you, Unfold Fest, all the things, where can I go?
Yeah, just unfoldfest.com.
Simple. So say a bit more about it. Feel free to plug as much as you want. What's happening? When's it happening?
Yeah, so the whole community is based around contribution from ecstasy. It's about it's just about like, how can we be in our joy, take care of ourselves deeply, and then be connected, right? Because you've never had this conversation. I started to have this conversation when we started finding the others, as Timothy Leary once said, go out, find the others. So this is what I'm doing. My life is now oriented to finding the other people who are interested in making a difference in the world, but not from obligation or some sense of deficit, from a sense of real joy and real deep self-care. The next Unfold Fest we're having is in May in the US, and Allison Armstrong is going to be keynoting, who I know has been a guest on your show, and we're going to be focusing on relationships. So you could say relationships from ecstasy, or you could say whatever you want. But she's going to be coming in, and she's a brilliant and hilarious woman who has made a huge difference in my life and my community. So I'm super honored to have her keynoting the next one.
Yeah. Oh, she I mean, she's an example of everything we've just been speaking about, isn't she, really? Yeah, I adore her. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. Until the next time in a year when we're talking about polarity and snails. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be ironic if I said it's not my pleasure, but it is. It's been my duty. It's been my grueling duty to have been here. Obviously not. Obviously, it has come from pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.